Great. All right, everyone. Welcome to our Expanding Roles of Women Curriculum Guide Teacher Workshop. I have to tell you, over the moon that you all are here. It has been, this curriculum guide has been a labor of love for more than a year. So I am so excited to be introducing it to you with my colleague, Nicole. A few housekeeping things to tell you about. The program will be recorded. It will be made available on our YouTube channel. And because it will be on our YouTube channel, we are also going to link it to the Learning Lab collections that Nicole will introduce you to towards the end of our program. So because this is being recorded, please take care to conceal from view and not share material that is private, sensitive, or confidential. And over the course of our time together, we're mainly going to be using the chat box for you all to engage with us and also to engage with each other. But Nicole has an annotation activity that she's also going to lead you through as well, just as another method of interaction engagement that you could use with your students. So before we begin, I'd like to provide a land acknowledgement for this program. Although we are getting together today from different places, we gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. So with that, I am going to try my best to tell you really the nuts and bolts of this curriculum guide. This workshop, if you've been to portrait gallery teacher workshops in the past, you know that we always have some slow looking and some doing. This workshop will be no different. So really half of this workshop is the slow looking and the engaging with artwork and primary sources. And the other half of the workshop is going to be a lot of show and tell. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Brianna White, and I head up the education department at the National Portrait Gallery. And I'm joined by my colleague, Nicole Vance. Nicole, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. My name is Nicole Vance. I work at the National Portrait Gallery as a gallery educator, specifically with student programs, and I love highlighting women's stories. So this is a real treat for me tonight as well.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Okay, so bear with me just 1 minute. What I am going to do is actually stop sharing and then reshare so you all can see the curriculum guide itself. So how it all began, that is the first big story that I want to tell you. We have an exhibition on the first floor of the National Portrait Gallery. It's called Out of Many, Portraits from 1600 to 1900. And when we were thinking about this space, and reinstalling this space, it's in the process of being installed right now as we speak, and will open in July of this year. We thought about ways to engage our collection with the teaching of history. It's very much a connection that's easy to make, given the mission of the museum to tell the story of America through the people who have shaped it. And we decided that for the first curriculum guide that the Portrait Gallery has created, at least during my tenure at the museum, which is just about 20 years, that we would focus on expanding roles of women. So the individuals that are highlighted in this guide will, over time, be seen in the Out of Many exhibition. In addition, there are more contemporary individuals that are seen in other parts of the museum as well. So the truth is that this guide is a pilot, and it was generously funded by Kathy and Mike Podell. And, my hope over the course of the next year is to see and to know how teachers are using this guide with their students. So it is incredibly in-depth. So let me just bring you down to the table of contents so you can see. So we start off with a section on how to use this guide, and it gives you all of the background information that you need to know what's going to come after. There is a Reading Portraiture 101 section in which we highlight the variety of ways and strategies that you can engage with portraiture with your students. There is a very in-depth background essay and timeline in this guide. And then there are 9 different lessons on 3 different themes. So the 3 themes that are highlighted in this guide are suffragists, professionals, and radicals. And for each theme, there are 3 lessons. The first lesson is always about that close looking, the reading portraits. The second lesson is engaging history. So thinking about the era that these women were living in and the things that they were fighting for, the accomplishments they were making. And then the third lesson is always connections to the present. So this was an opportunity to basically bridge what was happening in history to what is happening now. So thinking about figures such as Belva Ann Lockwood and perhaps connecting Belva Ann Lockwood to presidential candidates of today. So 9 different lessons on 3 different themes. Our focus today is going to be on reading portraits, and we're going to be in the radicals section. In the next workshop on February 23rd, we're going to be in the professionals section looking at engaging history. And then on March 29th, we're going to be in the suffragists section connecting to the present. So Nicole and I really wanted to give you a sort of a depth and breadth of what this guide is over the course of the 3 workshops. And then there are 2 assessments. So Women's Rights Convention and Sparking Civic Engagement. And both of these are meant to be done after lessons within the guide have been facilitated. We have created 3 virtual teaching posters, one on Zitkála-Šá, one on Edmonia Lewis, and one on Ella Flagg Young. And you'll also notice here in this table of contents that there's a section on Learning Lab collections. I won't get into that because after Nicole and I model the activity for you, Nicole's going to take you through the Learning Lab collections, which are a really great way to engage with this curriculum guide. And then, of course, additional resources. So other books, other websites to go to if you're interested in this idea of expanding roles of women. A couple of pieces that I do just want to highlight because if you know me, you know that I love details. So in this particular guide, if you go to the table of contents, you can click on the beginning of one of the sections and it'll take you directly to that section. And then at the end of the section, there should be a button to take you back to the table of contents. So in the Learning Lab collection, the entire guide is there, but then in the collections that Nicole will be highlighting for you today, you will also notice that we've taken this big curriculum guide, which is 160 pages, and we've broken it down into its discrete parts for the Learning Lab collections. Whew. Okay, that was a lot. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. And please, if you have questions along the way, you can certainly pop them into the chat, and Nicole and I can answer those either verbally or in the chat as well. And I will go ahead and put the Eventbrite link for the other workshops in the chat in just a moment. So without further ado, Nicole, will you bring up our image?
Yeah, of course.
All right, everyone. So our focus today is going to be on the radicals section of this curriculum guide. And like I said, we're going to be focusing in on reading portraits. So how we look at portraiture, this idea of reading portraits, is a way to observe and analyze, to tease out the visual clues that we see in images in order to tell the story of the particular image or images that we are taking a look at. So I'd like to start off by just having you take a look at this portrait of Zitkála-Šá. Look from top to bottom, side to side, all around. And when you're ready, to note in the chat what your initial observations are about this work. And when I say initial observations, I mean the things that you can see, not the things that we can infer, not how we're going to analyze, but the things that you see.
And Brianna, there was a comment in the chat about expanding the image. So I'll zoom in on Learning Lab and then zoom out.
That's great, thank you.
Those details a little bit easier.
Okay, so Krista is kicking us off with noticing that she's got some papers in her hands. She's looking to the side. She almost seems disinterested in what's happening.
I see looking away from the photographer as well, from Deborah.
Okay.
Jill's noticing that the long dark hair. And looking to even how the clothes are fitted on the sitter. So maybe even a little baggy, kind of an informal pose underneath that. Kind of shadows as well.
Okay, I'm noticing a lot of comments about the necklaces, the rings. So really thinking about her clothing. Stephen's noticing that she's slightly out of focus in parts of her pose. Excellent. And Ashley says that she's posed in a classical, that's a good question, Ashley. I don't know. Classical odalisque pose. Nicole, do you know?
Odalisque, I think. It's been a while since my French art history courses. I appreciated these comments about thinking about the photograph itself, how some areas appear blurred and more in focus.
Right. Right. And thinking about, again, this idea of, you know, when we think about engagement with the photographer, it does really make us wonder, right? Like what sort of interaction is the photographer having with the subject? And it does lead us into questions, Catherine, right? Is she outdoors? What is the setting of this portrait? And those are all wonderful. Definitely always keep questions coming. So I admit that I I didn't know anything about Zitkála-Šá before I started working at the Portrait Gallery, but she has a really fascinating story, and I'm just going to give you a tiny little bit before we start to make connections to another image of Zitkála-Šá, which is in the American History Museum's collection. So she was a member of the Yankton Dakota Sioux. She was born in 1876 on the Yankton Indian Reservation in South Dakota. She is remembered as a writer, a musician, a political activist, an intellectual, and a teacher. So she has really an incredible history. So she, when she was 8 years old, she was taken from her home and taken to Indiana, to the White's Indiana Manual Labor Institute. And she was in and out of that boarding school for a number of years. She has written that, that she was conflicted by that experience because she not only learned to read and write there and learned how to play the violin, but they also made her cut her hair and they made her pray in the Quaker faith. So there were both positives as well as negatives for her. So over time, as Zitkála-Šá grew up, she attended Earlham College. And while she was there, she began collecting stories of Native tribes. She studied violin at the New England Conservatory of Music. And in 1889, she took a position as a music teacher at the Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania. As some of you, all of you might know that this is probably one of the most famous Indian boarding schools of the era. So while she was at Carlisle, she wrote about Native American life. And her writing really was deeply critical of the boarding school system. And after one of her pieces was printed in Harper's Monthly, which described really the profound loss of identity of one of the students there at Carlisle, she was fired from that position. She then went on to work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. She wrote an opera, and then she joined the Society of American Indians, whose purpose was in preserving the Native American culture while also lobbying for full American citizenship. So in 1924, the Federal Indian Citizenship Act was passed, which granted US citizenship, but did not grant US voting rights. And then for the remainder of Zitkála-Šá's life, she really worked with tribes across the country to gain suffrage for all American Indians, working with the National Council of American Indians. So that's just a tiny little snippet about this subject, but I want to tell you this. So Nicole, can you bring up the other image? So we can start, thank you. So we can start to make connections between these two images and also what we know now about Zitkála-Šá's life. So this particular piece on the left is in the collection of the American History Museum. So as you look at both of these pieces, what sorts of connections can we make? What sorts of comparisons are you seeing? So style of clothing is different. This idea of colonization, decolonization, the duality of her existence, of her life. And Nicole, jump in whenever.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really appreciating these comments about her pose and how they're relaxed in both, even though that it looks different. Michelle, definitely, yeah, these split lives. We see a lot of differences in both. Very kind of this quietness or stillness, as Gail mentions. And yeah, and comments, talking about how her pose, looks like she's reading. She has that book on her lap, kind of showing her education. On a sense of voyeurism, looking at someone, thinking about the relationship with the viewer, with the photographer.
These are really all wonderful thoughts, great observations. So in order to move us right along, let's think about these similarities and differences. And, I saw a lot of comments coming through about this idea of, her duality, colonization, decolonization. So as you think about these two images together, and again, thinking about the little bit of biography that I shared with you, what might these similarities and differences say about the complexities of Zitkála-Šá's identity? So what might these similarities and differences say about the complexities of her identity?
Well, earlier in the chat, Jael mentioned, about Zitkála-Šá's remarkable life and how it reflects the experiences of many Indigenous peoples today, and kind of perhaps ancestors who went to these residential schools. Kind of this idea of walking in both worlds, the main theme of hers, not only in her life, but also music and writing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments about kind of existing in or between different cultures. That's from Stephen.
Okay.
The different roles and expectations. Jill as well.
Excellent. Thank you all for these really wonderful contributions in the chat. They are great. Please do keep them coming. I think it's always fun for you all to continue to read through them, and I will as well as we move on. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Nicole, who's going to take you through an annotation activity that is in the Reading Portraits lesson in the Radical section.
All right, well, thanks, Brianna. So what you're looking at right now is not only these two fabulous portraits of Zitkála-Šá, but we're viewing them on the Smithsonian's Learning Lab, which I'll talk a bit more in depth after our next activity. So here, you'll see on your screen an excerpt from Zitkála-Šá's story, kind of retrospection, a part of her American Indian stories. I'm going to just quickly put a link in the chat to a handout of the PDF, so you can see it a bit more closely if you'd like. So what we're going to do is we're going to read through this. We'll do it on your own. I'll give you about 5 minutes. I'm going to do 4 minutes to do so. And what I'd like for you to do is to annotate, kind of jot down some notes, kind of your thoughts, or maybe even perhaps any connections that you might have to this text. And since we're a bit of a larger group today, I'll annotate we'll consolidate your ideas on the screen momentarily. So again, I'll give you about 4 minutes to read through this, jot down some notes, and we'll come together and share. So I'll give you about a 30-second warning momentarily. All right, and there are a few comments coming through in the chat about downloading the PDF. If you're having trouble with it, I hope what you see on the screen will work for you. It's the same text. About 30 more seconds. All right. So in the chat, I'd be curious to hear from you, perhaps what phrases really stood out to you, or maybe even what connections you found between this text and the portraits that we were looking at. I'd love to hear it. Okay, I see some comments coming in from Jill, kind of the imagery of the slender tree. So I'll highlight that on here. Let me get my highlighting tool. All right. See, and from Shell, long-lasting death lies beneath the semblance of a civilization. Yeah, I agree with you. Very, very powerful.
And Nicole, Marilyn is saying the white savior and describing this very simply well satisfied, even though what they've done is beyond simply whitewashing.
Yeah.
And ahead, before Diane had mentioned that her writing and other creative endeavors likely revealed much greater intersectionality.
Yeah.
After her transition from her home.
Oh, they're just coming in all at once. Okay. Let's see.
And Nicole, are we supposed to be able to see on the screen highlighting that you're doing?
Yes. Are you not able to currently? There should be some green.
Nope.
Nope. Oh my goodness.
At least not for me, but maybe for others.
Let's see.
Oh, now it's now.
Oh, there.
I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. So we have these. Let me go back a few comments in here.
Oh, and Michelle says the coat of bark stands out to me as her culture was stripped away.
Yeah. So kind of going back to the idea of the slender tree, this imagery of, the importance of, land.
And Hillary is mentioning for the quote, white man's papers. Is this paper money? Is it books? Is it learning? Birth certificates, land deeds. So a question of what is it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great comment. Yeah. What is the papers? We'll write that here.
And that's in the first line of the second paragraph.
Let's see if I can, I don't know if I can move this. Okay. We'll draw an arrow. We're actually annotating. Okay. Let's see. Grasp of the injustice is done is startling. Yeah, so thinking about her image in portraits and biography. And Daniel again with, that last really powerful sentence of, even what is civilization, the semblance of a civilization.
Ebony is noting a switch in perspective from the internal to the external. Perhaps making connections between this colonialist gaze to the portrait that we saw before. My mother, nature, and God. A comment about the enormity of what was stripped from her.
Let's highlight that. And Deborah, thinking about the healing trees in the natural world, and all the imagery that we see here in this text. Okay. So I apologize for the hiccups with the annotation, but with the curriculum guide, the PDF, this page can be printed out for your students to go through, underline and annotate, to really get a sense of Zitkála-Šá's identity, her story, in addition to looking at those portraits. Okay, so we're going to shift gears now to what's called the exit card activity for this lesson. It's found in the curriculum guide, but also on the Learning Lab. Let me get my annotation bar away. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question. So this question is meant to be given to students as they're leaving the lesson. And I'd like to pose it to you. So how did education shape Zitkála-Šá's life? Consider the positive and negative experiences she had in school. Explain your reasoning. And then we'd love to say at the National Portrait Gallery of what makes you say that. Thinking about how you'll explain your reasoning. So give you a few moments to write your responses in the chat. Oh, and Jane, I'm seeing your comments about self-satisfaction of white men. Definitely agree with you there.
Nicole, as people are writing in the chat, it's always one of those things where they start to come in as a waterfall. I was thinking about this question as I was reading up on Zitkála-Šá, because again, I mean, the schooling that she had was it was really interesting, right? This idea that she was in and out of White's Indiana Manual Labor Institute. She didn't stay, but then when she came home, she thought that she needed to go back. So there was the that conflict that was happening for her then. And so when you think about her education over time, and how as part of it, you know, she started collecting stories of Native tribes, and then she started writing about Native peoples. It's interesting. It's not interesting. There is quite the transition that happens. I think without the education that she had, she certainly wouldn't have gotten to the point and the political activism that she pursued.
All right, and as you mentioned, Brianna, the responses are starting to come in. And a lot kind of in agreement to what you said from Carol, you know, thinking about how she's compelled to conform to a white identity, and so doing perhaps discovered her true and deeper Native identity. And from Michelle, you know, talking about, you know, agency, and how, you know, she was forced to make these decisions, which created lifelong consequences. Let's see. Oh, there's so many coming in. Yeah, perhaps an acknowledgement she learned from, quote, the white man's papers, as we did in our annotation activity, kind of looking through that text. Yeah, perhaps even thinking about the tools that she gained to be heard, and calling attention to colonial oppression. Catherine.
And Shel, thank you for your comment about if working with Indigenous students, being aware that this exercise may trigger some emotional responses. Thank you for putting that into the chat. Nicole, they keep all the responses. They keep coming in.
I know. I wish I had time to read them all out. From Patricia, I'm thinking about kind of her education allowed her to convey her authentic self, but through the vehicle of the dominant culture. Yeah. Oh goodness, there's so many. I wish I could read them all out. Oh, and I even see there's some great resources being shared in the chat. I hope at the end you save the chat to see a lot of these great resources that your fellow educators are providing, you know, even to supplement this lesson. Let's see, perhaps you could kind of focus on this question about best ways to kind of handle these discussions by perhaps, you know, first giving a trigger warning to the lesson. Brianna, maybe what are your thoughts, or should we maybe post that to the group?
I would love to hear what the group has to say about that. I mean, it might be, I mean, I think perhaps part of it too is slowing down in introducing all of this content. You know, we're right now providing a taste of what is what's in the guide, but we know that teachers know their students best. And we know that they know exactly how to work with their students, you know, as they're handling content that, again, might be, I don't want to say charged, but that might have an emotional response. And Shel, thank you for putting the document into the chat for everybody.
Okay. Well, I think for the sake of time, I might go through the learning lab. Oh, or I guess there is. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, keep those responses coming in the chat. I'm going to zoom out from this resource to focus in on this main Learning Lab collection. And I'm really interested to hear from you. Have any of you utilized the Smithsonian's Learning Lab in your lesson planning or with your students before? You could write just a simple yes or no in the chat. I'd love to know how familiar teachers are. Okay, I see a few yeses. Oh, I love to hear that. Oh, even some of you have made some. Okay, but it looks like there's a few newcomers to the Smithsonian Learning Lab. Just as a preface, the Smithsonian Learning Lab is a SI or Smithsonian-wide resource where you can pull objects from across the Smithsonian and use them to create collections or lessons. So this collection that we're looking at is titled The Expanding Roles of Women, Radicals. And as Brianna mentioned, this is one of the three kind of themes of the Expanding Roles of Women curriculum guide. So this collection features the lesson 1, reading portraits at different schooling, that looks at Zitkála-Šá's portraits, as well as some primary sources. So this Learning Lab collection really visualizes all of the resources that you'll be using for each lesson. So you don't need to have a PowerPoint. You can use this to share the portraits with your students, as well as many of the web resources. So each of the lessons starts with this yellow tile, followed by these chat boxes with either kind of discussion questions to kind of enter the lesson, and also to exit the lesson. We used one of those at the close of the activity. So this radical section also features an engaging history lesson, making inferences with primary sources. This one highlights the life and work of Mary Church Terrell, and have students look through a variety of primary sources through a gallery walk, and also has opportunities to kind of extend those conversations with your students, to utilize additional resources that the portrait gallery has to offer, by watching videos with portrait gallery educators. So really, again, a really great way to consolidate all of those portraits, so you don't have to go looking for them through the curriculum guide. They're all in one place. Also, PDFs of the handouts and any other materials that you might need are placed in each of the lessons. There's also links to the full PDF curriculum guide, as well as online exhibitions, and they all link you back to this main, what I like to call kind of your home base collection. So let me move your faces around. And if you click on this resource, it'll take you to, let me just get to where we need to go, this main home base collection. So this is for the entire curriculum guide for expanding the roles of women. And you'll find the background essay and timeline, as well as links to other collections. This curriculum guide features a introduction to portraiture, or reading portraiture 101. This collection, I'm just gonna click to it here, so you don't have to wait for my computer to load, introduces your students to portraiture. So if portraiture is not your cup of tea, or not maybe as comfortable using it with your students, this is a great way to introduce them to really the key terms that are important while discussing portraiture, as well as the elements of portrayal. If you've ever attended a previous teacher workshop, we know how important these elements are. And with each of these, if you click on them, and there are even examples of portraits that correspond to the lessons that are featured in the curriculum guide. Also, the great thing about Learning Lab, if you have not used it before, you're welcome to save these resources to your own collections and edit them as well. So it's a great thing about Learning Lab. This reading portrait collection also includes teaching strategies, so thinking about ways to use these portraits with your students, and even breaks them down into kind of observation strategies, interaction, engagement, analysis. And many of these resources or strategies work with all of the portraits in the collection. And again, links to handouts that you can download for your students, print them out. And then again, this link to return to that home base collection. All right, I know I'm doing a lot of talking. Oh, yes, and I'll send a link in the chat to this main collection, and it'll get you to where you need to go. Welcome to kind of explore this as you like. I'm just going to highlight the other two themed collections. So we were looking at radicals. There's also one on suffragists and professionals. So if you attend our upcoming teacher workshops, we'll be highlighting lessons from each of these collections. And again, following a nearly identical format of 3 lessons, reading portraits, engaging history, and then our last one down here, connections to the present. I'm a personal fan of the connections to the present. And I feel like there's real life applications in these lessons. With this one, thinking about a woman presidential candidate and kind of visualizing what that might look like. And again, at the bottom, all of those PDF resources. So if you would like to just pick and choose one of these lessons, you can have the resources here. Just give you a teaser of expanding roles of women professionals. This one looks at working women. The first lesson centers on women artists, Mary Cassatt and Amelia Lewis, with opportunities to kind of connect to contemporary artists of the period or contemporary or current artists of today. And thinking about what women or what counts as work, and connecting to the present, thinking about the work of a first lady, and again utilizing a lot of the existing resources out there of online exhibitions, as well as these teaching posters, which if we return back to this main collection, you can find these all here to download. We have one for Amelia Lewis, Ella Flagg Young, and Zitkála-Šá. And you can use these with your students. They have even further close-looking questions, biography as well. And finally, additional resources. These are web resources that are pretty invaluable to studying the roles of women, whether that be Smithsonian resources or from national parks. And then finally, the curriculum guide here at the end. And I realize I skipped over assessments. There are 2 assessments that you can use with your students. The first looks at, let me move your faces around. Or this is the second, sparking civic engagement. So this complements the Suffragists collection. We'll talk a bit more about that at an upcoming workshop. But here students can really create their own campaign strategy and think about what the visuals will look like. That's a great creative way to assess student knowledge. And then the last one I did not have pulled up, but let me pull it up here now, is a mock convention. So students will learn about the Women's Rights Convention and then take on roles of historical women, many of which are featured in the lessons and across the themes. So your students will research life of these amazing women, and then have their own convention. So taking into account kind of the perspectives and the opinions of the women that you see here. So again, a really fabulous resource that we hope that you'll use with your students. Sorry, let me go back to this main one. And I know that was a lot of information all at once. Again, the link is in the chat if you'd like to explore on your own. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Nicole, I don't know if you saw, but I'm just beaming over here. It's so fun after all of this work to see the final Learning Lab collections. And there's some really, really wonderful feedback, really wonderful feedback in the chat. So I'm just beaming over here.